New Calvinist books and ministries are much better known than confessional Reformed Baptists like we are. So let's kind of describe who New Calvinists are. They are often young Christians. In many cases, never had another Christian experience other than this. They either grew out, were converted from unbelief into a Reformed, came to Reformed conviction very early on. Maybe Allie, maybe that's how you would describe yourself, or maybe not. So came to Reformed convictions early on.
I was converted into Fundyism.
Very briefly, and then we moved into the megachurch YRRs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So within what, 2 or 3 years?
Right. Yeah.
You would end up in Reformed circles. There are those who just came to Reformed convictions slowly but surely by reading old Calvinist books and coming to an understanding of Reformed theology through people like Jonathan Edwards. And they would get a Valley Edition or a book by Jonathan Edwards that has a preface by John Piper. You've even seen the t-shirts, maybe like I have, it says Jonathan Edwards is my homeboy.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen those shirts? They are in many ways young, restless, and reformed. And these often end up being, yes, sir? Oh, but it wasn't. There we go. This is unfortunately the case oftentimes with church pastors who come to Reformed theology and like, woohoo, Reformed theology, let's go, church. And they take their church in Reformed theology and the church splits, or they get fired, or they burn out. So there's unfortunately a heritage there too. Varying levels of success. I know multiple pastors who have tried to introduce their church to Calvinism or Reformed theology too quickly and disastrous results. There are good people who have done so successfully, like Court Strassner, who's been at Pleasant Ridge Baptist for 20 years, and they wouldn't call themselves a capital R, capital B Reformed Baptist, but Court himself is, and the church has slowly over 20 years righted itself into a ship going the right direction. Let's talk about some of the leaders. So let me ask you, what are some leaders in evangelicalism that are often associated or seen as leaders in the New Calvinist movement? Mark Driscoll. Wah, wah, wah. Who else? John Piper. Okay. Matt Chandler. Okay. Okay. David Platt. I think he's the director of IMB right now, I think. For Tim Keller just died. Yep. 2 or 3 weeks ago. A month ago, maybe. Cancer, pancreatic cancer. Okay, who else? Ligon Duncan? I don't think he'd be considered a New Calvinist, no.
They're before. Oh,
Okay, anybody else? Other New Calvinists that have been influential in our last few decades? Okay, C.J. Mahaney and his protege, well, former protege, Josh Harris.
What's the guy? Paul Washer?
I wouldn't call him a New Calvinist. James McDonald, do you call him a Calvinist?
He was definitely part of the YRR.
Okay.
The guy, we're talking about the
Chicago guy who got ousted because of being a bully and financial issues.
he
And
was right along with Mark
okay,
Driscoll.
all right. It's not one that I had written down, but I think you're right. All right, let's talk about some of these. Tim Keller, former pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church, PCA, in New York City. He was the co-founder of the Gospel Coalition, which remains one of the strongest institutions of New Calvinism. He authored lots of books, and many of which are helpful. The Reason for God is probably his most famous. Prodigal God, he has a book on prayer. He has some devotionals through Psalms and Proverbs that he co-wrote with his wife. He has a book called The Meaning of Marriage, which is very, very helpful. Not everything I can personally endorse, but I have found him very helpful. He thinks very pastorally in all his books and preaching. My favorite of the young Calvinists, because he's actually a confessional guy, Kevin DeYoung. Yeah, Kevin DeYoung. So I'm going through the Presbyterians first. His church, previous church, used to be in the RCA, which was and still is a liberal denomination. And he was one of the remaining conservatives in it, but he helped that church leave the RCA, and now, as of 4 or 5 years ago, he left to be the pastor of Christ Covenant Community Church, or something like that. Christ Covenant Presbyterian Church in the Charlotte area, where he also teaches at Reformed Theological Seminary in Charlotte. He is a popular author in general, but also on his blog on the Gospel Coalition. He has books called Just Do Something, which was influential in my wife actually marrying me. So thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that. Crazy Busy. If you're busy, don't be too busy to read this book. Really is a helpful book. And there's a bunch of other books that he's written as well. Ligon Duncan, Chancellor of Reformed Theological Seminary. Now let's go through the Baptists. Now, this guy, I'm not sure cleanly fits in the New Calvinist circles, but I think he can qualify as an influence, and that's John MacArthur from the West Coast. His Grace to You, radio ministry, expository preaching. There are scores of pastors nowadays, and even Christians, who model their ministry of philosophy of ministry after John MacArthur and his church over there. Then there's Johnny Piper, who is 40 years older than me, exactly to the day. Wrote his book, Desiring God, back in the 80s, and his ministry is based on the title of that book. Let the Nations Be Glad, The Pleasures of God. He's written lots of good biographies of Reformed Christians from previous centuries. If you know anything about John Piper, he's a crazy, passionate preacher. That's how he does it. I'm passionate, but not quite that way. Another guy, co-founder of the Gospel Coalition, but a Baptist. What's his name? Co-founder of the Gospel Coalition? Not T4G. Tim Keller and D.A. Carson. D.A. Carson, yep. When I first became a Reformed Baptist and was heading to Pennsylvania to be on staff, and I said, I'm becoming a Reformed Baptist, that was the only mental category that my colleagues had for Reformed Baptist. They thought, oh, D.A. Carson. And I had to be like, well, yes, but no. Not quite the same. He's very academic, very scholarly, written lots of commentaries. He's edited study Bibles. His most famous work is probably a book called Exegetical Fallacies, and it's very, very helpful, by the way. Yet he would hold to a form of covenant theology similar to our founding pastor, Tom Wells, and so we would disagree with him on his new covenant theology. Oh, I thought you raised your hand. Piper, yes, he's not as well, he's not written as much on the subject as Carson has, but yeah, he would not be the same that we would on things like law and things like that. Now let's talk about Southern Baptists in particular. What Southern Baptists can you think of that have been influential in the New Calvinist era? There's one down the interstate from us, a few hundred miles. Al Mohler, yeah. Southern Seminary has been a hotbed for New Calvinism. He turned the boat around in 1993, or started, I should say, but by the late 1990s, the ship had finally set a good course coming out of liberalism. Then there's his friends and influential ecclesiologist Mark Dever, church historian, pastor of Capitol Hill Baptist Church, where he went in 93, about the same time as Al Mohler, and helped to revitalize that church, and now it's a very healthy church. Then you got, as you guys already mentioned, the Charismatics, the Continuationists. C.J. Mahaney He was, I don't think he still is, but he could be, the leader of Sovereign Grace Ministries. And there was some debate about his leadership due to some sexual abuse that happened under his watch. So he's kind of a name that not everybody likes. Josh Harris, who, when I originally gave these lectures, had just gone back to seminary, but now, 7 years later, he has repudiated his faith entirely and is no longer claiming to be a Christian. And there's Mark Driscoll, was basically a bully pastor, asked to leave his church out on the West Coast, and now he's pastoring in Arizona once again. And getting popularity, unfortunately. Let's talk about some of the groups now. Tom Askell would be a confessional Reformed Baptist in the Southern Baptist group. So he would be similar to Al Mohler and conservative and Calvinist, but he would be a step more Reformed and a step less new. A step more confessional.
Maybe that's why you a lot of people that I would consider new Calvinists based on the description are also big on like Calvinist ministries and things like that. So is that kind of like a gateway drug to more?
Yeah, if we have time, let me come back, because that's a good point. But if I don't, do I have time? No, but it is a good question. All right, we'll pause on my notes, and I'll answer that question. So the question is, are new in the sense that they are coming to Reformed theology, now gravitating more toward confessional people too? Is that your question? Okay, do you want to rephrase the question so I understand?
My question was really just is Tom Askell a new Calvinist?
Okay, well let me ask my question. Is it becoming cool now to become a confessional Reformed Baptist? I would say yes and no. Because when I was coming into Reformed theology, historic Reformed Baptist confessional circles were not cool at all. I mean, you didn't have such a thing as G3, and ARBCA was starting to get bigger, but then it splintered, and then it became nothing basically. And so I don't think that it can be called trendy in that sense. But what I want to clarify is that there has become, and I don't think this is a good thing, that when people have left their bad theology or even their fundamentalist theology, they often take some of that fundamentalist mentality and bring it in with them to their newfound Reformed convictions. So they basically become Reformed fundamentalists, in a sense. And not all of Reformed fundamentalists are new in that sense. For instance, Metropolitan Tabernacle, where Peter Masters has pastored for 40-something years at Spurgeon's old church. I wouldn't call them trendy or new by any means, and yet they're essentially King James only. You also have some of the G3 folks being, in my opinion, a little bit too separatistic, and some of the same founders' issues have similar issues. So I think the Reformed Baptist Network strikes a good balance at being healthy in both law and gospel, and not being too law-heavy, as some Reformed Baptists have tended to be, or too adding cultural values. Well, this is what we have to do. Music with contemporary beat is automatically evil, which is what I grew up with, and that's what you're kind of now seeing seep into Reformed circles. On the whole, though, I'm thankful for the growth of our circles. I mean, Reformed Baptist Network in the last 2023 GA will be 7 years since the association was founded. And we're already up to like 60 churches or something like that. That's a pretty big growth in a short period of time. And not all of them are like old ARBCA churches or old Reformed Baptist churches that just finally gave in and joined an association. In many cases, they are churches that came to Reformed theology and want a good network to be involved with. And I think we're seeing good success there. But we do need to be careful not to delve into the error of the new Calvinists, which really don't see much of a need for the law at all, whereas some of the Reformed fundamentalism, or you might even say theonomic fundamentalism, Reformed circles, an overemphasis of the law. So we got to thread that needle really carefully. Any questions or comments on that?
To answer your question, I think I put Tom Askell and Founders in kind of the same boat as R.C. Sproul
or James White too, where they are not themselves new Calvinists, but they're definitely influential on the movement.
Yep.
A lot of people who are new Calvinists would have read The Holiness of God.
Yeah.
I think one comment I had is when you said at the beginning, at least in a lot of the circles of folks that I knew back on the West Coast, it seems like they answer the question, is it becoming among new Calvinists cool and trendy to become confessional? My answer to that, at least for the people that I was around, was yes, until they actually read it.
Yes, until they actually read it. Yeah. Okay.
I think the flip side to that though is there is a movement, I think from our generation in particular, where if we grew up in churches that were, as I've heard it termed evangelifish before,
Yeah.
where there's not a lot of solid foundational structure in the church
Evangelifish.
context, and there aren't good answers to hard questions.
Yeah.
Moving towards confessionalism it's not necessarily cool or trendy, but it's comforting.
Okay.
Because you're gaining structure from Scripture that you didn't have before. So I think while some of that is true, when they finally get to it, they're like, wait a minute, what are they getting us into? I think on the other hand, and I think I can speak for this from my perspective as well, I think there is a hunger for that kind of environment versus what we had growing up.
Yeah. To that point, I think we're seeing an uptick, whereas it used to be a downtick, on a desire to have God be seen as transcendent and God to be big and worship to be reverent to Him and not just like down to earth, yo, what's up, church? We're here to gather on this. You know, I'm not cool, as you can tell. I try to be cool. Yeah, not even close to being cool. So I think there's a pendulum swing back up. It's like, let's treat God more seriously in our worship and so forth. And I think that's a good trend for the most part.
Would you say these fundamentalist Reformed Baptists or the theological movement, and are they influenced by New Calvinism, or is it more of a reaction to New Calvinism? Just maybe the other way.
That's a good question. Is it a reaction to or cause of? Is that your question?
Yeah, like a reaction to just swing the other way, or is it they're influenced and they stack upon what they were?
I would think kind of both. Because you have those who were in some sort of fundamentalism or separatistic group, and they come in Reformed theology and they just bring it with them. They don't realize that they have it with them.
Right.
So, but I could also see it the other direction too. So it's probably both ends, is what I would guess.
I think what I was just going to add, so it's a comment that I made, I would kind of put myself in that boat. It was someone new, I was excited to join the confessional church here.
Yep.
And then as part of the membership, like actually reading through it, there were some things I read that I was kind of, it kind of had to affect me and change me a little bit.
Yeah. So you were one of those who...
I was one of them that was like, confessional. And then I actually read it in detail in preparation for membership here, and I was kind of like,
Cause you kind of think about it. Yeah. And it's important for us because we're going to undoubtedly see more of these join our church as the years go on. And they have no experience with Reformed circles. I mean, except for Roberta in our church, those who grew up in a confessional church, which hers was Presbyterian, she might be the only one that I'm aware of. All of us are transplants. So, all right, next time we will pick up, Lord willing, with the rest of this lesson on New Calvinists, because I only made it halfway, but we've had good discussion. You're dismissed.
Have enough people, do you think that it's worth it to set up in here?
We'll just go in the small room.
Go in the small room?
Yeah, we're small enough, yeah. Laura Lee, you coming to say hi to me? Come here. Oh, it's good to see you. Uh-oh, I got caught. Do you want to say something?
No.
Hello. Say hi, Daddy. Say hi, Daddy. Hi, Daddy.